How's it going, my friends? Welcome to another episode of, I guess this would be Carpo After Dark. It's almost dark. It's the evening. I stepped outside here for a moment. I was going to make a face-to-face video, and then I thought, nah, maybe I'll just grab my voice recorder and add slideshow pictures to it. And I said, no, that's too much work, too. I'm just going to stand out here and take a couple bong hits and look around at the evening and talk to the camera about the absurdity of existence and the absurdity of matter, if you will. And, I didn't even want to prepare for this or try to get any notes or ideas out, to try to explain because I don't understand it. And whenever I look around at the world, I guess I'll give you kind of a preamble here first so you can see where I'm coming from. First I gotta take a delicious bong hit with some canna. Hold on. Perfect. So, when I talk about the absurdity of matter, or the lack of space, the lack of matter, what I mean is that, of course atoms being mostly empty space really means nothing. Let me kind of give you an idea of what I mean. Okay, when you say that atoms are mostly empty space, you're assuming that space is something that something else is within. In other words, if we didn't have planets, if we didn't have galaxies, if we didn't have what we call matter, then there would be no such thing as space. What defines space is points within something, okay? Not going to get too technical on this, but since atoms are the very matter that make up the universe, then they can't really be empty space. What they can be is energy fields. And those energy fields are tighter and tighter woven in on each other. The only way I can describe how I view an atom is like an onion, more and more winding energy fields that we realize that, there's no electron until you look at it. The observer, creates a point that there's particle wave duality, and I know a lot of this I want to keep on just the normal, put it this way, a lot of this stuff I want to keep on the layman level so I can explain it, but at the same time I am the layman because I don't understand all this stuff either. So I'm not pretending like I get it. I'm not a physicist, but one of the most fascinating things to me is chaos theory and matter, and how matter is mostly matter is what we consider atoms, or I should say atoms are what we consider matter. And for some reason, those atoms hold a particular shape and choose to bond with other atoms that are similar, or the same type. And then these atoms, for some reason or another, various laws of nature, they bond together to form these molecules, and these molecules form these chains and these polypeptides and DNA and all the way down the line to these super complex structures. And the question that science has always had is, it's not about why do things fall apart, but rather why do things build themselves? Why does anything create? What is creation? And the more you think about it, the deeper you get, the more you understand why it's so hard for these, old scientists who have been studying, you hear about a lot of these guys towards the end of their lives, and they're trying to reconcile the idea of God with science, and realizing that science has already proven that to them, a lot of them, that God must exist. But they're still trying to anthropomorphize God and put it in a form where they can understand and comprehend it. What I'm thinking about God is not a man in the sky or even a personal God, but rather everything is imbibed with consciousness and awareness, but at a level we can't comprehend, just like the hive mind of the bees, or how the ants can create an anthill with each individual doing its job. How is this all done? How is it done so perfectly? What type of communication? Sure, they can communicate through chemical signals, but how does this all organize and coalesce into an organized structure? And organization is just amazing. The fact that, this is what a lot of religious folks use as a reason to say, hey, look, God must exist because certain things are irreducibly complex, and the example that's often used is the eyeball. And of course, if you look closer, it can easily be reduced to evolution. First there was a little, the fact that something that sensed sunlight could rise and fall according to whether it was day or night. Certain advantages adapted. So the question isn't whether evolution happened. It is, why did it drive the way it did? If you know what I mean? Why do things grow more complex? Science just does not have a legitimate answer that makes sense to me. And the more I listen to some of these top scientists who try to explain it, they finally get to the point where they just admit, hey, we don't get it either. And that's why the whole, quantum mechanics is kind of ignored by a lot of scientists, because it's things we can't comprehend. Things don't behave on that level the way we expect them to. A particle, a wave, a wavicle, whatever you want to call it, everything is basically energy and therefore empty space. So when I look back to when I was a kid, I was about, well, not a kid, I guess I think about, we had these books when I was younger called All About books, and we had a whole series of them, and the only one that survived was All About Chemistry, and I remember reading it when I was, 17, 18, 19, and I was reading it again, and I was like, wow, there's this particular word in there called phlogiston, phlogiston, and up until a couple centuries ago, they believed that phlogiston was what burned when things catch on fire. They didn't understand carbon and the atomic level, so they said, well, combustion is this stuff, vaporizing, and then eventually the word disappeared. But within that book, and it was written, I think, in the 50s, so it's old, but, these same ideas still persist today. That's what I'm saying, which now it's like 80 years later, and there's all these different ideas that we had about how things, how the world works and how things are made up, but we ignore some of the more complex things that we don't want to talk about. We have... in the book, there was this chapter that was about atoms, and it was my first introduction to what they thought atoms were, and you get the typical model. But then when they said they were mostly empty space, I remembered walking down the road that day, and I was walking to the bus stop, and I was looking down at the sidewalk, and just amazed with the fact that not only was I not really making contact with the sidewalk, but it's just... repelling charges of atoms, if you will, but that everything underneath me was completely empty space, and the only thing holding it together was, well, at that time, I didn't even really consider what it could be, some sort of electrical field or, existence, trying to explain existence is, impossible at this point, so I kind of let it rest in the back of my mind for the next 20 years, and I think about it all the time, and I finally started to, see the idea of what they mean by, of course, a holographic universe or a projection, or the fact that, not fact, nothing's fact, but the idea that we really do create our own realities in a form, in a way, and how time and space are connected in a way that the average person really can comprehend some of these things. And when I say average, I mean a person who hasn't spent their whole life studying physics. When you talk to people about these things who have an education in them, it's difficult to convey how what you picture in your mind. You're like, I get this, but I can't explain it in language. And I think this is why mathematics is such a great a wonderful language for people to communicate in. They're like, I get this, and then they write a formula or a theory, and it fits, because math is a language that some people read. Human language, English, that's nothing compared to some of these amazing universal languages that can be read by any culture. So eventually any human language can be deciphered, but when it comes to universalities, perhaps human language wouldn't do much good on a planet where, well, I can't even speculate what other planets might be like, but where things may be communicated differently. Maybe it's not certain entities or beings may not be capable of comprehending language in the form that we use, which are vocals, and, we write them down, writing, using eyeballs to read these things. I'm kind of getting off track there, but not really. It's one of the most amazing things to me is the fact that we think that our language is so important because we don't understand the deeper languages, and mathematics is a deeper language. I've said in the past, art forms, and art is a language, and it is, but the reason why art is a language is because it uses geometry, and that, I guess, that just clicked in my head just now. I never realized that, because I've said that math and art are both languages, but it just hit me when and this is why I do videos like this. I'm sitting out here rambling about shit, and it all just starts to make sense to me, like, okay, art, and yeah, of course, geometric, but anyhow, we have, art as geometry, then we have mathematics as mathematics, and we think of geometry as a branch of mathematics, but, like Euclid, they, believed, I guess geometry was the language. Written math with numbers is a completely different system. And plotting points on a graph and all these things, these ways we use to describe the universe. But they make sense to the people who put their theories together and say, oh my God, it fits the model. And the question is, are we creating that fit, that reality? Or do these theories really fit? I remember hearing that there was something like 9 different string theories. And when they did the math, they found out they were all right. And I have to look back at that because it was a while ago, but string theory means nothing. It means that there's tiny vibrating strings at the quantum level beyond anything we can comprehend. And then you say, so what? What are those strings made of? That's the onion. That's the onion. So it's irreducible. You can never stop reducing. Infinite smallness is something we can't comprehend, or infinite vastness and size. We just occupy this small plane where we are today, and it's pretty freaking amazing. I mean, existing. Looking up there at that light, I had to check and make sure I had time. I'm down to like 3 minutes, unfortunately, because I'm really feeling like I'm wanting to convey a couple more ideas here, so I'll take one quick bong hit before I finish. So we have this, as I spoke, we have math and we have geometry as these languages. And then all of a sudden the question becomes, and this is something I've always believed firmly, any true language of God or the universe must be obtainable, at least in part, by the average person without having any special understanding of the universe or without doing any particular education or research, because every culture has researched things differently. I think what's really important, as all cultures would say, is what's in your heart, and if you truly desire to know, you will understand, and it takes time. It's something you have to train your brain to do, to start to comprehend the world in shapes and ideas and metaphors instead of, seeing everything as just black and white and thinking about people and what people say, But going into the depth and ideas, looking at a tree and seeing the similarity between a lightning bolt and really comprehending that in a different way for yourself, not just to show off and say, look how spiritual I am. So, each his own. We have to find our, what's important to us. But I think that language of math and geometry and art, which encompasses both, can truly be seen in certain forms of expression, and especially what you would call the Fibonacci sequence, which is 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, so on. It's adding the previous numbers, and this is nature's pattern. This is repeated everywhere. That's the one you see in the nautilus shell, in the sunflower, in the pine cone, in broccoli, especially like Romanesco broccoli, I think it is. Stuff's amazing. And these patterns repeat over and over and over in nature. It is a repeating pattern that's based on that chaos. And from that chaos arises order And I really wanted to go more into the chaos theory thing because it's just so fascinating. Not theory, but really how order arises from chaos, and then chaos falls back into disorder, or at least it seems to be on the surface. Every ripple in a pond, and how this is why we can't predict weather more than, really locally or long term, is because certain things are chaotic and they're very difficult to measure. But that's for another time. So I'm going to leave you with the street light up here. Looks like I have about 30 seconds. So yeah, thank you everybody for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed something from this. And I'm going to go ahead and make another one pretty soon and talk more about chaos because it's so fascinating.